Joe Wilson, United States Army, Vietnam. Joe's one of my Huey helicopter pilots, warrant officers, just an amazing story. Probably one of the best stories that I have of a Huey helicopter pilot as you watch this. I know a lot of you are watching the Vietnam stories. I have so many stories from Vietnam, and a lot of them were the warrant officers and the crew chiefs and the gunners and all the people that man these helicopters. And I interviewed Joe in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was February 20, 2007, almost 16 years ago. Almost 16 years ago. I believe Joe is still with us. I hope he is. I need to check up on him. But Joe flew with the 1st Aviation Brigade, 189th Assault Helicopter Company. But he originally was assigned to the 5th Special Forces Group when he went to Vietnam. Before he went to Vietnam, he had airborne and Army Ranger training, but they had such a need for helicopter pilots, he became a pilot with his buddy. And just like I said, he tells an incredible story. He enlisted in the military, and in February of 1969 to March of 70, he was in Vietnam. And oh, I love the Huey helicopters, just like the Higgins boats, the landing crafts that brought the soldiers and the Marines into Iwo Jima and Normandy. You know, the helicopters were the mode of transportation in Vietnam, so I'm fascinated with these stories. I want to thank Charles Jeffries. Charles, I look in this camera and say thank you, sir, for sponsoring Joe's story, making it possible for a lot of people to learn more about Vietnam and what these warrant officers went through as they flew these helicopters, these Huey helicopters, and just an amazing story. But Charles, thank you. God bless you. Thank you for your dedication to our veterans and helping support my work and your service to our country through the work that you're doing through our veterans. So, amen. I'm grateful, totally grateful. Folks, I'd like to encourage you, like Charles did, to step forward and become a sponsor of one of these stories. I have many of them in my archives. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears has gone into this work, folks. A lot of resources are needed to bring these stories forth. I think people just take it for granted. There's just going to be another story. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes work going on, folks, and all the years of interviewing these veterans across North America, over 1 million miles traveled. And I thank God that, you know, the Bible says, if I can quote the Bible, give honor to whom honor's due. So that's what I'm doing, you know. An act of remembrance is an act of honor. And that's why I love doing what I'm doing. I'm very passionate about my work, as you can tell, bringing you this story. So I'd like to encourage you to become a sponsor. There's video information in the video description and on my website, larrycapeto.com. Just click on Sponsor a Vet. You'll see pictures of a lot of veterans. Just click on one of them, include their name in the sponsorship so I'll know who you want to sponsor. If you'd like to just donate to my work, you can do that through the comments section of this video, and I hope to hear from you. I get a lot of great comments from you people. I wish I could thank everybody. There's so many great people out there. Subscribe to this channel and share these videos with others, especially our younger generation, because they need to know why they're free. And these veterans that have served and those that are serving today, you know, the blood that's been shed over time. So, all right, thank you, God bless you, and I hope to see you again on another episode. Again, what year you were over there, Joe?
I got to Vietnam in February 1969 and rotated out of there at the end of February or beginning of March of 1970.
Did you enlist or?
Yes, I like many young men at that time there, I was in college, and there's a lot of turmoil in the 60s as to the future of the country, and I got caught up into that, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I dropped out. And of course, my father, who was a World War II veteran, said, well, you either join the Army or get back in school. And I didn't want to get back in school, and I got a notice about being drafted, so I enlisted rather than being, I didn't want to wind up as a frontline infantryman. And I enlisted with a friend of mine who suggested that we become pilots in the Army, or go to OCS, which they would take us at that time without a college degree. So we signed up. We took the test, and we found out that if we were flying, we'd get almost the same pay as lieutenants, and we wouldn't have to be walking on the ground. I said, hey, that's for me. So we signed up. He decided not to go to flight school. I wound up in flight school, and about a year later, after I finished flight training, I wound up in Vietnam. I was initially assigned to the 5th Special Forces Group because in that time I was in the service there, I'd become a Special Forces qualified. I did all the things that one needed to do to get into Special Forces. I'd gone through the airborne training and the Ranger training, and then did that. But when I got there, they had more of an urgent need for pilots, and so I wound up doing that. And then I did that for just 2-3 months, and then the Special Forces Group lost its embedded aviation, and I was sent to the 1st Aviation Brigade, which was the large Army unit for aviation in Vietnam, and I wound up in the 189th Assault Helicopter Company in Pleiku, Camp Holloway.
Tell me about when you first got in country, what you remember about the sights, the smells, just what you experienced where you were.
Flying into Vietnam, and the airplane door opening, I was near the front door after this horrendously long flight, 22 hours, and they opened the door, and it was just the smell of like outhouses, and it was just strong. And I thought, I can't believe this. It was just all over. This is on the Air Force base at Tan Son Nhut, and I couldn't believe this. And then they took us to from there in buses to the replacement battalion at Long Binh, where we did some in-process, and they were assigning us to different units. I'd originally been on orders to go to a unit further south of Saigon, but when I was at Long Binh, I was told, no, you're going to the 5th Special Forces Group at Nha Trang. And so we were there for a day or so, and then all of a sudden on our way out, there's a lot of color, there's a lot of things going on. They were getting our uniforms, our jungle uniforms and whatnot. They told us to pack up. We were going to catch a flight out that night to Nha Trang, or our different locations there. So they put us on buses, and I had my duffel bag with all my things there, and I forgot what else I had there, but it was quite a bit of stuff there. And I was the first one in the first bus in the front seat there, and I was told, okay, you're in charge of the bus or whatever. And I said, okay, fine, which didn't mean much. We're just going between Long Binh and the airport. And as we drove into the airport, I saw these military police around their little bunkers by the entrance, and they're shooting their guns. And I'm thinking, boy, this is really something here. I mean, they get to shoot whenever they want to, just for the heck of it. I didn't realize that the Tet Offensive had already started for 1969. And as we got to the terminal, which was a big open shed with a roof over it, mortars started landing. And I was trying to get off the bus because by then I realized that, hey, we're under attack. And the bus driver was the first one off. He said, hurry up. And I was struggling with my stuff there, and not thinking that I should just leave it. I tried grabbing my things, so I was delayed getting out of the bus. And as I got out, several mortars were landing there, and I saw the driver lying down, and I thought he'd tripped. So I said, come on, get up. And I reached down to grab him there, and he was covered with blood. He'd been killed. But I didn't know that at the moment. I thought he was injured, so I was trying to drag him across there, and there were some military police around. They helped me to drag him, and I just left my things there and went into a bunker. So it was quite an experience there to be for that to happen just very within a few days there, because it was still almost like a vacation when we got there, because it was quiet. There wasn't anything going on. It was a big military post, and we knew we were in a foreign country, of course. When a lot of pilots had flown over there, and I knew a lot of the guys who were with me, but that was sort of our baptism. And then when we went to Nha Trang, they told us that Nha Trang had not been hit since 10 of 1968, and we were hit that night by people who were in the perimeter of the wire trying to get through, and we were told not just to stay in our rooms in our bachelor officer quarters. And I said, well, oh no, I'm not going to stay here. So I ran into a bunker, and I asked some sergeant if I could have a gun, and he gave me a gun, and we were shooting at the people. I don't know if who we were shooting at for certain, but he said, shoot there, and so I'd shoot, and I was like, this is crazy. I had absolutely no idea what was going on at that point. And then the next day I was sent to my unit within the group there, and I stayed there for a while flying helicopters.
Well, let's talk about the Huey helicopters. Just give me a brief overview of what it is and what it was used for in Vietnam.
Vietnam was I guess the beginning of the helicopter war. The Huey was developed as at that time, a very powerful helicopter with a turbine engine, like a jet engine. Before the Huey, the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy had been using reciprocating engines like a car engine. So with the advent of the turbine engine adapted for use in helicopters, with Huey, we put in a lightweight engine into this aircraft, and it could carry more with it. Of course, compared to the helicopters now, they can't carry much at all. So, but they were unique then. So the Huey helicopter was used for carrying troops around out from staging areas to take them out to combat, and then to go out and pick them up. Well, then they were also adapted to be used as gunships to protect the other helicopters and troops on the ground once they were there. And they were also used for carrying supply cargoes. Eventually, they were being used by commanders to control their troops on the ground. The use of the helicopter, I guess, was just limited by the imagination of the people who were in the service there, with coming up with creative ideas. Like I remember one point I saw a helicopter that had a 105 millimeter gun put on it, and I remember when they fired it, it blew the bottom of the helicopter off because they'd forgotten about the kickback of this. So, and there was others that they'd land them in landing zones and open up the back end of like these large helicopters, and they'd be shooting away, and just with everything they had, they'd load all sorts of weapons on them, and then they'd fly them out. But mostly the helicopters we had were very poorly armored. They had the Hueys that I flew, which were the utility helicopter, and then I flew the Cobra later on at the end of my tour. But the Huey is just a utility helicopter, do everything. And with the armor we had was a seat with a panel that would slide across, and the seat was armored, and with armrests about this high, and then the panel that we'd pull out there by the door to protect us. But in front we had really nothing to protect us. There were no self-sealing tanks. There was no armor on the aircraft. It was if you'd step on the body of the aircraft, it would collapse. It was like an airplane, unlike the aircraft today. So we improvised. We'd put things in the helicopters to protect ourselves. In the chin bubble, some of the people would put in armor plates that we had. We had bulletproof vests that were made out of a ceramic material. We'd wear that armored vest, and then on top of that we'd wear a flak vest, and then we'd get helmets that we were told were ballistic helmets. And guys would carry their guns in different positions to protect themselves. And but I think for most of us, we just never thought we could die. We were young guys. When you're 20, 21 years old, 22, you really can't die. I mean, other people die, but you can't. It's only when you get older, I think, you realize that, geez, gosh. So we do some crazy, silly things. We'd take off overloaded, over our gross weight. Helicopters generally take off from a hover. They'd pick up from the ground and then take off. Our gunships were so heavily loaded that we would slide along the ground to take off, just to get up enough airspeed. And we'd get them as light as we could on the skids because we couldn't hover them for the greater part in the Central Highlands, and then slide across and take off. And then we'd land very shallow landings there. And the first time I got into a gunship, I'd been flying the other helicopters into landing zones, and I thought I was a pretty hot shot pilot by that point there. I had maybe 500-600 hours of combat time there, and I'd be going down to these, what they call hover hosts, straight down, moving back and forth. I thought I was hot. And I got into this gunship at Camp Holloway in Pleiku. I was with the instructor pilot, and he told me, just pick it up to a hover and back it out of the revetment. I couldn't pick it up to a hover. It just would not get off the ground. I said, there's not enough power. And he said, well, yeah, there is. And he grabs the controls, and all of a sudden the helicopter just rises up about 6 inches, and back we go. He said, okay, you take the controls. So I took the controls, boom, right down to the ground. I said, I don't know what's the problem. He said, well, you don't have a fine touch yet. And I'm like, my God. I said, I've been flying these things for months. I'm good. But I wasn't good enough. And they showed me how to fly the gunships. To develop the touch there, and it was really interesting flying those overloaded. We never carried a full load of fuel. We couldn't. We'd never been able to move the aircraft, so we sacrificed fuel to carry more ammunition and rockets and whatnot, and then we'd fly in usually 2 helicopter teams, what we call a light fire team.
Well, I want to go back to, I didn't realize you flew combat assaults or whatever with the other. Can you tell me the missions, just give me the idea, take me on a mission, a combat assault into a landing zone, whether it's hot or not, and the crew, and if you have troops, how many, and just walk me through one of these.
The combat assault generally, for the unit that I was at with the First Aviation Brigade, the 189th Assault, we were assigned to support combat units in our area, the 2 Corps area of Vietnam around Pleiku. The missions would be assigned at nighttime through our battalion operations, then down to us to the company operations, and then we would, of course, assign the aircraft for it. The planning would be how many aircraft were needed to move so many troops, and we'd have to decide on and how many we're going to send out. And we'd do that, and then how many, if they need gunships, how many we'd need to send out. We'd then go to the staging area for where the soldiers were going to be picked up. In the Central Highlands, there were very few places where we could land several helicopters at one time. There was usually one helicopter in at a time into a landing zone, and it'd be one right at land, take off, the next one land, take off there. So there'd have to be a lot of protection. So we'd try to arrange the loads of soldiers to get as many on board as possible. But since we were in the Central Highlands, which was a very high area there, and it was difficult to fly, the higher it is for a helicopter, the more difficult it is to land and take off and what. So we'd have to know the altitude, and we'd load the number of soldiers and whatnot based on that. The troop carrying helicopters were usually what they call the D model Huey and the H model Huey, and they had a bigger engine, more powerful engine. They could carry more. The gunship, the C model Huey and the B model Huey, generally, since they didn't have to do that, they didn't have as much room inside them. So these other Hueys, these larger Hueys, would take soldiers, and they would be staged a certain number of based on what we'd tell the ground commander to carry, and we'd usually land, and we'd have the air mission commander and the assault commander and the gunship commander would go and talk to him, tell him what we could do and how it would be arranged and how many we would like on each ship. They'd set that up that way. They'd pass the word down. We'd then go out to our helicopters, move over to where the troops were. They'd get on board, or they'd walk over to us, and we'd then go out to the landing zone. The way that we'd generally did it on the zone itself is that the gunships would precede the slicks, the troop-carrying helicopters, and prepare the landing zone either by firing at it if it was a type of mission where we weren't sneaking in, or flying in what we call a daisy chain, which was our pattern to use to go around and circle there to two gunships to protect on each side of the landing zone. The slicks would then land and then drop off their people and take off and until all the troops were down, and that'd be pretty much the same way on picking them up. Under fire, of course, it was different. Usually there was a lot of shooting going on. There were people talking. The gunships were prepping the area, and there's the ground forces talking, the helicopters talking on one channel, the gunships on another, and sometimes a commander up above talking to everybody else. It sounded like pure pandemonium. And when I was there, I just said, I'm never going to learn how to listen to all this at one time and filter out what I don't need to hear. But I eventually learned, like the other guys did. The crew, the gunships would be shooting with their machine guns. The co-pilot would be shooting the miniguns. Pilot would be shooting the rockets. The gunships would be, the slicks would be down on the ground where they'd have their machine gunners and they'd be shooting. And it was real pandemonium at times there. But amazing enough, these pilots were hot dogs. They were real hot dogs. Young guys. They do things that guys who were older probably would never try because sometimes they were teenagers. So many of the pilots in Vietnam were right out of high school, and some like myself, in college, and once in a while we'd even run into some guy who'd actually had a job after school before going in the service, and it'd be, my gosh, what's this old man doing here? My boss was 24 years old, and we called him the old man. But the gun we had. Going back to the combat assault, it was always a scary situation, and that's one of the reasons why I got out of slicks to go into guns. I was a little bit concerned about not being able to shoot back when it's just landing someplace, and I wanted to be able to shoot if I was getting shot at. And so an opening came for the guns, and I put in for it.
Well, it's interesting that you sound like you were invincible. I mean, at one point, and when does that leave?
I think for me, it occurred when I guess about three or 4 months before I left Vietnam, before my tour. We were supporting a special operations for the Military Assistance Command. We were flying into Cambodia in 1969, dropping off soldiers and mercenaries and different people to go kidnap soldiers from the North Vietnamese army. The North Vietnamese would go into Cambodia to rest and recuperate after fighting in Vietnam, and of course we couldn't go after them because of the way the war was fought at that time there. So we would sneak in, and the Air Force had been supporting this mission for a while from a place called Duco, which is right on the border with Cambodia. In fact, it was like here across the street from Cambodia, so, and that way being west. So we would fly west anywhere 50, 60 miles and drop these people off and go, and then a day later or whenever they were seen or when they got somebody, we'd go and pick them up. So we started losing people, a lot of people at that time, losing aircraft. We get the aircraft really shot up, and we started thinking, oh, this is really bad, because we'd get shot at anyway at the aircraft, and once in a while somebody would get killed in Vietnam, but this was like constant. It seemed like every day we were losing people. And my last 3 months, I was shot down 4 times. Not where I, forced down like the aircraft in flames or anything, but where if I didn't go down, I was going to fall out of the sky like a rock. So 3 times it wasn't really serious. The aircraft was hit. The 4th time, I guess, was, excuse me, I guess it was the 3rd time. The 4th time wasn't. So the 3rd time was pretty serious. And I actually landed in Cambodia and lost a couple of guys. But that's when I think this could happen to me. And we were concerned, very scared at that point there about dying in Cambodia because we were on secret mission. Nobody knew we were there, supposedly. And when I was shot down, and I went onto what they call the guard channel to call out that I was getting shot down because my radios were shot out. Except for that, for some reason, that frequency worked. All sorts of aircraft all over Vietnam heard me, and they were asking me, "Where are you? Where are you?" Well, we had a forward air controller flying over, controlling things for us, and he was telling people to disregard, not to come over and call out the other gun team. We always left one gun team back at Duco to act as reserve in case people went down to help out. And the gun team came immediately flying over there to pick us up. And after we'd run a little ways. But at that point, I said I knew that I said if I stayed much longer, I was going to probably die in Vietnam. So when I finished my tour, and about a year later, I was ordered back to Vietnam, I was very scared. Because I said, the law of averages is going to get to me. So I'm not going to make it the next tour. Fortunately, the war was starting to wind down, so I wound up in San Francisco, and just at the Oakland Army Depot, and I was told, go home, go back to your unit. And I didn't ask why. I just went.
You mentioned you lost a couple of guys on that 3rd time you went
Yes.
shot down.
Yeah.
Were they killed or what happened?
Yeah, they were killed.
In the crash?
We didn't crash. They were killed with. One guy was killed initially. We were hit by anti-aircraft, and that was my gunner. And I was flying. I was teaching my co-pilot to be an aircraft commander, so we had traded seats that day because he was going to fly as the aircraft commander. I was checking him out. I was a tactics instructor pilot, and he'd been hit, but I didn't know how bad. And so he started yelling out that he was hit, and I saw the aircraft. All the lights were on. It was just a big mess there, and the blood was being blown around by the wind.
So you switched seats with the pilot?
No, I didn't. Excuse me. I took over at that point and told my crew chief to take care of the gunner. The pilot was hurt. I didn't know how he couldn't do anything, so I started going down. I told the other people I was going down, and I was trying to get to the ground before the transmission seizes. When the transmission seizes, the blade stops turning, and then it flies like a rock. It's right down. So I got to about, about 10 feet off the ground, and the blade stopped turning. So we hit the ground pretty good, not real bad, but like a rough landing. And I stayed on the radio, telling people where we were at, because I wasn't certain if my wingman had seen where I was at, and telling the slicks. And my crew chief got out, and he stood out by the door, my door, while I was inside destroying we had some of these secret frequencies you're supposed to use, what they call SOIs, and I forgot what that stands for, Secret Operating Instructions, Standard Operating Instructions. And I was tearing those up there and burning them. And then, well, he was shooting, because we're still getting shot at. And I got out. And shot up the radios in the front. We had some classified scrambler thing called a KY-28. And I shot that up so it wouldn't be captured. And then I went back and got my gunner, body by that time, and told my my pilot, who was hurt, he wasn't real badly hurt at that point, or at least it didn't seem to be. I said we had to run. So we started running, and we, with my crew chief leading the way, and my co-pilot, he grabbed the machine gun of the gunner, and he had his own rifle, and he was running with one in each hand, and he tripped. And for some reason, that was the funniest thing that we'd seen. He just tripped. It looked like a cartoon. He just went boom right on his face. And he had his helmet on, but he was just moaning. And I started laughing about that, and so did Richard, the Diamond, my crew chief. We thought it was hilarious. And we're like, what are we laughing about? So we kept running. And we're still being under fire. It turned out that we'd landed in the North Vietnamese unit's base camp. It was pretty well hidden, but we'd landed in it, and that's why we're getting shot at so much. So we ran away, and at one point there, one of the slick drivers was going to land and pick us up there, and I was kind of concerned about that. I was thinking, gosh, if he lands, we're all going to be down here. So I went out and I waved him off not to land because of all the fire we were under. And my wingman asked why he didn't land, and he said, well, that I waved him off. And the wingman said, you better land, because I'm going to shoot you down if you don't land. He didn't know that I'd waved him off. He didn't think I'd waved him off there. And I was thinking, well, why did I do this? Why did I wave him off? I said, I could use some help down here. And then we ran a little bit further, and then we were picked up. And my co-pilot by then was pretty well hurt, and he died later on. Maybe he was shot on the way while we're on the ground there. I don't know. I never found out. But
did you ever use your ship for medevacs at all? Did you?
Yeah.
Is that something that's still vivid in your mind? I mean, is it chaotic at those times? Is it organized? Are you helping, or just sitting there hovering? Or what?
Generally, the pilot and the co-pilot just sit there. With their hands on the controls. Generally, the aircraft commander has his hands on the controls, flying it. The co-pilot would have his hands lightly on the controls in case the pilot was killed. Right then, he could take it right away. The crew would be grabbing the bodies, or the people, the hurt people. We call them bodies, of course, they weren't bodies, but hurt people, and getting them on board and getting the heck out. I did not fly medevac as such with the Big Red Cross, but I did do medevacs because there weren't enough medevac helicopters or units around there. We flew the slicks. We were involved in taking out injured people, and one of the most notable was a dog. One of the guard dogs was injured, and we were called in to evacuate it. And I wasn't flying the slick that actually did it, but one of my friends was, but he asked for help because he was going to go in and pick up an injured scout. And the troops on the ground were very upset about this dog. We didn't know it was a dog. A scout, we assumed it was a person. So we went in. It was right at dusk, and they were under fire. We suppressed a lot of fire. The slick went in, took a lot of hits, and I think crew may have been hurt. And as he came out, he called me, and he called my call sign there, and he said, "You'd never guess what the scout was." And I said, "What?" And he said, "It's a dog." I said, "Well." I said, "Well." I said, "Dogs are good." They were very helpful. So it was funny. That was a funny memory then. And of course, what's interesting is that we went to Vietnam. Generally, we didn't go as a unit. Unlike most wars, we went as replacements. The original units went there. So when we left there, we also left as single persons there by ourselves. So we really didn't develop much of camaraderie there. We know them when we're there, then we'd leave. So I never saw any of the people I flew with at all for years. The only one I was interested in seeing was Richard Diamond, my crew chief, and it was only because he was from the same area of California that I was from, and we had some mutual friends, although we hadn't known each other. We lived close by. Well, for years I'd go back to that part of California, Southern California, and I'd go to look him up, and I'd be looking for Richard Diamond, and I could not find him. I'd look in the phone book, and finally I was, maybe 15 years after Vietnam, or maybe even 20, I was visiting there with a friend, and he said, you know, every year you come here, you look for this guy. Did you ever think that maybe you're misspelling his name? And I'm like, no, I didn't ever think that. He said, well, think about it. What other spelling is there for Diamond? I said, well, D-I-M-O-N-D. There's D-I-A-M-O-N-D. I said, he said, well, try that. So I looked up Richard Diamond, D-I-M-O-N-D, and he was living about 2 miles away and had been there all that time. And we hadn't got, so we've been, ever since then, we've been together. You know, I called him up and I said, is this Richard Diamond who flew with the Avenger guns in 1969, 1970? He said, yeah. So there was a separation between officers and enlisted men. He was my enlisted gunners and crew chief. So I think he was a little bit hesitant about striking up a conversation again with somebody. So, but we did, and we've been friends ever since, and I see him on a regular basis now out in California. So it's not too often. I haven't seen any of the other people. I've written to them, but I've never seen them.
Joe, does it become routine flying all these missions, or is it always the adrenaline rush? And you know, I think Hollywood makes it look glamorous, which I don't think it was. But is it become routine, or is every mission different? I mean,
there's some missions that became very routine, like flying convoy cover between. That was just like flying in circles around a convoy that was moving forward, just back and around. Then every so often, there'd be some shooting. It would just be boredom with moments of
stark terror.
Well, that's one way of putting it. Yeah, but it'd be moments of adrenaline lifting excitement. I guess, you know, I got into guns because I wanted to shoot back, but it was a real kick at the time there to be shooting rockets and miniguns and watching when everybody else was running. They call for the gunships, and then here comes the cavalry to save them. And that's what I guess we envisioned ourselves at the age of 20, 21 or so to be like that. That, you know, like everybody's running, but we're right there fighting the bad guys and not running away. And
tell me a little bit about the enemy, just personal experience, who we're fighting, and then what kind of weapons they were using against you.
For where I was at, we fought mostly the North Vietnamese regulars in the Central Highlands along the border. When I first arrived there, we were involved in missions doing that in the Central Highlands out of Pleiku, supporting the special forces out of a place called Kontum, and we'd fly into the Parrot's Beak area and tri-border area, and they were. I didn't ever see any of the troops. I would get shot at them by them, but never see them. And they seemed to be pretty good soldiers. They were. They didn't, of course, have the aviation that we did, but they seemed to be pretty good. It was one of the things we'd joke about is that we'd hear about this North Vietnamese soldier who'd pick up his mortar round in North Vietnam and in Hanoi, and he'd come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He'd be being shot at by F-4 jets, gunships would be after him, the B-52s would be dropping bombs on him. He'd be weeks and weeks along this this trail there, and he'd finally get down to South Vietnam, and he'd come up to the mortar pit there, and they'd take his mortar, take it, boom, and off it'd go, and they say, okay, go get another one. And I said, these guys were tough. They were pretty tough soldiers. I respect them, even though they're the enemy. I haven't met any North Vietnamese soldiers since then, but I have met some North Vietnamese, and they're like us. They have their own reasons for having fought the war. Of course, we were doing it we thought to keep South Vietnam free, and they were doing it to unite their country. Who was right? Well, it's hard to say. I guess history will tell.
Are you conscious in combat of fighting for like God and country, or is it a matter of survival, or what are your thoughts when you're fighting for your country?
Well, of course, the ultimate thing is that we are there for our country, but I think individually we're there to take care of each other. We have a mission. The idea is to get the mission done, but it's there to take care of each other and make sure that we all survive. Overall, to accomplish the mission for our country, we took care of each other. We protected each other. We take risks for each other. I taught my crew, and it was very common to try to fly a bit, to try to land the helicopter. I figured that if I was killed or disabled and my co-pilot was killed or disabled and neither one of us could fly, that somebody would have to. And I showed Richard, among other people, a couple other crew chiefs, how to do the little bit, to get us to the ground. And even though it might roll up the aircraft, at least we get to the ground and reasonably safe. That was the idea, just help each other out. And I don't think we were so concerned about the politics of it, although of course we knew that, who the enemy were and that they were, the Viet Cong were doing some bad things in the area to people, but we didn't see them too often.
So the crash in Cambodia probably might have been one of the hardest times for you, or were there a lot of times like that?
There's a lot of other things. That was probably one of the more significant ones there. But
But is it do you land in a hot LZ and ping the AK-47 rounds are hitting
yes.
And you're wondering if you're going to make it? Are you?
Yes.
The troops, the grunts are jumping out. I mean, is that what I'm describing?
Yes.
So, I mean, are you just sitting there calm, and are you just?
You're not calm. By no means. Not calm, but you got to stay until they're all out or until they're on board. You have to, regardless, have to stay and be yelling at them. Hurry up, be yelling, screaming at them, telling the crew chief, tell them to hurry. Hey, we're getting fired, whatever. There'd be so many things going on there. You say, hurry up, hey, tell them, and then go. There was a lot of feeling between the aircraft crews and the soldiers, the grunts. They depended on us. When they were hurt, when they were to get their mail, to get food, when they're in trouble, and it was sort of became this is our job. This is what we do. We're good at this, and we were about the same age, for the greater part. The pilots flying the helicopters as the troops, maybe a little bit older, but not much. So there was a lot of empathy, and. Amongst us. So they got in trouble, we'd go get them. They were hurt, we'd get them. They were hungry, we'd take them food on a regular basis. So but being shot at was not a nice thing, no.
Well, going back, I mean, when you're done with the mission, the nights, I mean, how do you debrief? How do you process what happens during those days? And do you just hold it all inside, or what do you do?
We go back to our camp, not all the time, but to Camp Holloway. And Camp Holloway was one of the largest aviation battalions in Vietnam. So there was an officers club, there was enlisted men's club, there was a few basic things there. Plus it was close to some of the other military units there. The Air Force had an Air Force base close by Pleiku. At the end of the day, we'd finish up, the crew would take care of the helicopters, and we'd go to operations and fill out our reports of what we'd done. And then we'd be through for the day, and we'd anywhere from getting together for beers at the club to just having dinner to trying to catch a ride to go see somebody at another camp, to taking a helicopter for a joyride to go see somebody who might be hurt. But mostly there's a lot of boredom. Write letters like anybody else, of course. And it was. I remember thinking though at the beginning of my tour there that it was going to be a very, very long tour because it was lonely. I remember being very lonely because I didn't know too many guys. I mean, certainly got to know them, but it's very lonely, and I didn't really want to be there. I said, "Oh, this is not good." And so by the time I finished, we did have some fun. There was some fun times, but it was we'd talk over what we'd done wrong during the day. We'd talk tactics. We'd try to improve ourselves because we discuss it. I remember when I was just about the time I became the pilot. I was going through some good training. I was in an argument with another guy who was also becoming a pilot, and he was flying my wing, and we'd been shot at, and so instead of climbing out, I dove to the ground, which is one of the two tactics, either climb out or go to the ground. And he was saying I should have climbed out because I was high enough. I said, no, I wasn't high enough. We need to go to the ground. And of course, he had to follow me. So we were arguing back and forth there. And then the instructor, pilot, the tactics instructor at that time got us aside and let's talk it over. And with the whole platoon of gun pilots as to what was the best thing to do at that point. We're right in the mid-zone, and what do we do when we get shot up by this? And it was good training, so we did do a lot of learning on that. And what do we do when we have this type of situation with the slicks or that situation? Besides the fact that we had to take our regular check rides for the helicopters and learning how to shoot the weapon systems and be good with them. So, but it was boring for the greater part.
Were there any times when you're landing troops and doing insertions or whatever, where the troops were being shot on the helicopter or getting out, or were you even aware of any of those things?
Oh, of course, yeah. Usually on the way in, we'd know if we're going to be under fire because you could see the bullets coming, the tracers or the flashes from the guns in the LZ, and we'd know that we'd still have to go in, of course, and guys, and the soldiers would start shooting out before we even got to the ground. And of course, our door gunners would be shooting. When we were picking them up, they'd be telling us they were under fire, or coming from a certain direction or whatever, or sometimes we'd even have to land in one direction, then turn around and go out the same direction. But we knew when we were under fire. You could tell. It was just you couldn't so much hear the pings as feel them. You could tell when the aircraft was hit. It was sort of like knowing when there was a problem with the aircraft engine by just the feel of it. You got to know the feel. It's like when you're driving your car. You know when something's wrong with it, even if you haven't checked the oil or looked at the instruments. You feel that something's wrong, and that's what we could do with the aircraft.
Could you see troops being over your shoulder? Could you see maybe being shot up, or were they thrown right back on the slick and taken out of there? I mean, is that things like that happen?
At the time that we'd be picking up wounded, they would be brought in from the sides, one side or the other, or both sides sometimes. And we could see generally. We'd try to be ready to go at the moment they're on to try to leave because it was done in a hurry. So, and usually the crew would, of course, be telling us the same thing. Okay, they're on board. Let's go. But we could see them coming. they'd always have to come from the side. They knew enough not to come from the back because that's where the tail rotor was, but always from the side or from the front or something, so we could see them. It was really it was always interesting picking up wounded and dead soldiers. It was very trying, very trying. We'd always make a run for the evacuation hospital or wherever the place where we were supposed to take them for wounded.
Were there medics on board going on these flights back or not?
No, generally no.
So they're just back there in stretchers, ponchos, or what?
Sometimes it depends. At times, somebody might jump on board with them who might be a medic. Generally, they just put them on, say, get them going, and we'd have our own crew say, hey, do what you can for them. They're like, well, I don't know anything about this, you know. So, well, they'd learn a little bit. Say, well, just put something to stop the bleeding, or generally they'd have something already taken care of. They wouldn't just be thrown on bleeding all over the place, or they'd have their own medics, or would put stuff on them, say, okay, they'd just try to stabilize them. So, but only once in a while something would happen that they couldn't. They just throw them on board. Not very often though. I don't recall more than once where somebody was just put on board who was bleeding all over.
And then where would you take them? And then when you're landing, you got a medical crew coming out, or what's happening?
One of the places we took them to in Pleiku was the 79th Evacuation Hospital. Sort of like a MASH unit, except the newer thing. And there was a landing zone for the helicopters to land on. And we call in ahead by radio to them, hey, we're coming in with 4 on board hurt or whatever, and we'd try to describe some of the wounds, and they'd meet us there, and we'd leave, and the next one would land there. But generally, the medevac helicopters were the ones who did most of that. We did it when there weren't enough medevac helicopters around, or there were none around, and there weren't that many around there, so we'd wind up doing it. But that wasn't our primary mission. Our primary mission was to move troops, get them in, get them out, and or in case of gunships, to shoot. The other things were incidental. Of course, we did them, but it wasn't our main function. So.
Did you have any sort of homecoming when you came home from Vietnam, or what do you remember about that?
I was assigned to the A Special Forces group in Panama when I left Vietnam. On my, I flew in through Washington State, SeaTac, or was it McGuire Air Force Base? I think it was McGuire, just outside Washington, SeaTac, and I was in the reception area there. We'd just gotten off the aircraft there. There was a phone call for me. I was like, amazing, a phone call. How did anybody know? Well, it turned out it was my brother-in-law who was in the Air Force. And he'd been checking around, checking the flights, and he was able to find out that I was on board, so I talked to him a little bit. So I told him what I was going to do. I was going to be going down to pick up a new car, which I'd ordered, and then drive it across to see him and my sister in Georgia at a SAC base at that time, Strategic Air Command. So I just had like my uniform. I can't remember, it was a khaki uniform. And I had my flight jacket. It was wintertime. It was cold. I flew down to San Francisco, and I was in San Francisco airport, and I had my jacket unzipped because it was warmer in the airport. And by gosh, my welcome home was 2 military policemen told me to zip up my jacket or I could be arrested. I'm like, I just got back from Vietnam. Yes, sir. Get it zipped up. All right. So, put down my stuff, zipped it up. So that was my initial. When I saw my sister and my brother-in-law, it was pleasant, and but there was no homecoming as such, other than, hey, glad you're back type thing. There was no parties. There was no parades. I didn't expect that. It was not the war. I was just happy that nobody said anything bad to me. Which I knew that had happened. Some of my friends had already left, and they'd write back and say, "Hey, gosh, it was terrible," that this type of thing. So I was fortunate. Then from Georgia, I flew to Panama, to the Panama Canal Zone, and of course that was very heavily military area. I never had any of the things that occurred that one heard about after Vietnam or the homecoming.
Are there sights, sounds, or smells today that remind you of Vietnam? Or bring back memories?
Oh yeah, sure.
Like what?
I smell aviation gasoline at times when I'm flying out the airport. It's like brings back, JP4 brings it back. I every so often I hear a helicopter flying around that has a sound similar to the Huey, the whop 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 sound, and I'm like immediately looking up there to see if if it's what it is. That's really about it.
When you came back home through the years, did you just forget about it? What happened in Vietnam? Talk about it?
I was in the Army another 3 years
Okay.
or so after I returned from Vietnam, and I was busy. After I left the military, I became a federal agent,
Okay.
and I was busy catching crooks, I guess. I'd think about it, but of course, every time I get out to California, I'd try to look up my crew chief, and but I never was concerned about it until I guess my kids started getting older, and asked me if I'd been in Vietnam. And I said yes. And then maybe 4 years ago, I was in California, and we were staying in a hotel, my wife and I, turned out there was a Marine battalion that was having a reunion, and they were, my wife went wandering through the hotel and saw one of the stands where they had a man was putting together trophy boxes for medals, and she came back to me and told me about that, and I said, well, I don't even know where anything is. I didn't know where they were at. I'd had them, they were been sending things that I'd been awarded. I didn't know, so he said, well, just give me your DD-214 and, it'll say what you got there, and I'll look up the unit there and look you up. He had some way of finding out. Mm-hmm. So my wife bought that for me for my birthday and for the kids, mm-hmm. to enjoy, to understand, and I guess it was, I guess I started getting more of an interest at that point there. I was, the unit that I was with this last year, they asked me if I'd be interested in writing a history of what went on. I haven't done that. I asked my crew chief if he wanted to, and they wanted to know about. Apparently, when I was shot down in Cambodia at that time, it was a pretty significant action, mm-hmm. and we were told not to say where we were at. I was told that they couldn't. I was put in for a medal of some type, and I was told that I would have been put in for a higher one, but they couldn't say where I was. They would have to say where I was at. Where we were at in order to do that, and they didn't want to do that because it was open up a can of worms or something. I said, well, I don't care. I was just happy with just being back, and it was like I was getting closer to my end of tour, and I was like, oh gosh. So that was just before Thanksgiving of 1969 and then I was shot down just a little bit before Christmas again, and I was like, oh, this is too much. I was just, I don't want it. I was tired of it. Then I said, they had nicknames for people who were getting shot down, and I had to give a class on the proper placement of thermite grenades on the deck and how to destroy helicopters properly, because I hadn't destroyed mine properly. Well, it wouldn't burn for some reason. I threw a thermite grenade on it. It wouldn't burn. I don't know what happened. So it was left there, and so the battalion commander, and I don't know if he was half joking or not, but he had me give a class in the hangar on how to properly destroy a helicopter. Oh gosh, it was funny.
Have you been to the wall of Washington, D.C., the Vietnam Wall?
Oh yeah.
What do you remember the first time you went there? How did you feel? Why did you go there?
I didn't go there for for years. I didn't, after it was put up, I just didn't want to go. I don't know why I didn't want to go. But when I finally did go, it was in 2002. The beginning of 2003 when I first went. I was up there for a business meeting, and one of the guys I was with said, "Hey, let's go see the wall." And I said, "I didn't want to go." He said, "Come on." So somebody I said, "Okay." So we got in the taxi from where we were meeting at and went down there, and it was quite an experience. It was. I guess it does what a lot of people say it does. It's a calming effect there. So I went through the whole thing. I went and looked up the names of some of the guys, saw where they're located, and I went over there and looked at their names. And as a result of that, every time I'm back in Washington, I go to the wall now and say hello. And my son, who's there now, he goes to the wall and says hello. So, and my grandson's going there next month, and he told me he would say hello. I said, well, so I said, well, say hello to these guys. So it was, I guess that's, it brings back memories. It brings back memories of things. Just, yeah.
We're just about done, Joe. I've got one more question. What does the American flag mean and represent to you as a veteran?
Well, having grown up in a family where the veterans, father, uncles were World War II, another uncle was in Korea, cousin was blown up as a Marine in Vietnam. It deals with what the country stands for, what we want it to stand for. The flag itself to me, is just a piece of cloth. It's so if somebody wanted to burn it, it wouldn't affect me. But it's the ideal behind what this country is about and what it's supposed to be about. That's the reason I wear it. I've been wearing a flag since before it became popular. After 9/11, years ago, I started wearing a flag. Not because I'm more patriotic, but because of what I said, what it stands for, the ideal that this nation was created under. And I like that idea. I like that idea. So it's worth protecting.
Well, I want to ask you to do one more thing. I do it all at the end of my interviews. Hope it's okay. From where you're seated, when I tell you, can you look into the camera and give me a salute from where you're seated right there?
Sure.
Okay, Joe, right into the camera.